So, hey, this is D.
This is C.
And this is Black Meets World.
World.
Wow. Let's do that again. This is D.
This is C.
And this is Black Meets World.
It's been a minute, but not that long. Jeez.
I just went for it. Okay. So we have King Williams, who's our dear friend in Atlanta. He's a filmmaker and producer here with us today. Woo-woo.
Hey, King Williams. I'm going to call your real name.
Hey, we go back, so it's all good.
Yes.
It's definitely all good.
Yes.
All right. So tell us what you're up to.
So what I am a filmmaker based out of here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am currently in the process of releasing my first documentary, which is called The Atlanta Way, which is a documentary on gentrification in Atlanta. And I'm also working on, as a producer, on a documentary that will be out next year from the people who brought you the Central Park 5, and it will be on East Lake Meadows. And so I'm here today to talk about both projects.
Awesome. All right, so you're ATLian, right?
I am born and raised the East Side to this day.
Hey, so born and raised in Atlanta, for those who are not as familiar. All right, so is this a passion project, you working on the Atlanta Way, or how did you come across, creating such a documentary?
For me, it became a passion project. It actually initially started out as a class project when I was at Georgia State University in my senior year. And it really came because there was a housing project that we had in Atlanta called East Lake Meadows. Mm-hmm. And at one point in time, particularly in the late 80s to mid 90s, it was considered one of the most dangerous housing projects in the United States. Its crime rate
I didn't know
at one point in time, its crime rate was 18 times the national average.
What?
And when we talk about like crime and we talk about things like that, I just remember as a child going by East Lake, riding the bus or, riding in someone's car, because my parents didn't necessarily always have adequate transportation at that time. And if you lived on the east side of Atlanta, particularly, Atlanta's a really spread out place. And so if you lived on the east side of Atlanta at that point in time in like the 90s, like the east side was pretty much like the east side of Atlanta. That was definitely considered for most parts, East Atlanta, Kirkwood, Decatur. And then there was this housing project that kind of sat in the middle of all three. And those are all three small towns. To give a perspective for you people listening, it would have been like kind of how Compton is to LA. Like, it's obviously a part of it, but it's not necessarily directly related. And there was a housing project called East Lake Meadows.
Is East Lake Meadows what they used to call Little Vietnam?
It used to be called Little Vietnam. It did.
Gotcha. Because that's how bad it was.
Yeah, and it was an unfortunate name that was given to it. And so when I got to Georgia State, actually, I remember as a child asking my parents what happened to the projects. Because when you're a child, you see a building, you see people, and then all of a sudden you don't. And you just kind of don't really put two and two together. And so when I got to Georgia State my senior year, I decided I was going to do a paper on it or a class project and maybe do a little 15-minute documentary. And so what happened was, I didn't end up doing that, but what happened was when I graduated, I just asked a couple people and said, hey, anybody want to go out with me? I think I want to make a documentary on something. And then within like a month, we had like 60 hours worth of footage of people. And I was like, okay, there's something here.
Awesome.
And it wasn't necessarily on East Lake at that point. It was then on just what was happening to the other public housing projects in Atlanta, because for you guys who don't know, Atlanta in particular was the first place to actually open its public housing units. Now, a lot of people want to say New York and the first houses, and those are housing developments. But when we talk about federal subsidized New Deal programs, the first place that actually opened up its doors was Techwood Homes in Atlanta. And so, and so a lot of people don't know that. But all these other cities are having public housing projects opening about the same time. Even though Techwood opened first,
what year
there were still other 19. Oh gosh, now I'm going to get this wrong.
No, just an estimate. Just estimate.
1937, I believe. I believe it's 1937.
Wow.
So it's 80 years, and this is very interesting too, just with the political climate, considering who is running HUD now and what the government is considering wasteful spending. 80 years ago, this was considered cutting edge modern living. And for the most part, the way we see gentrification now in other cities where a lot of new high-rise and new development, instead of being a private company, this was the government doing it, but doing it in every city across the board in the United States at the same time.
Right.
So there is a bit of precedent to it. And so when I started my project, I knew none of this. So I just kind of came in just saying, okay, I did this little class project at Georgia State, and I kind of want to do this documentary. And then over time, I just realized how big and how large the scope was. And so for me in this documentary, it was just a matter of filming the last remaining public housing projects, and then over time seeing how that's kind of changed Atlanta to where Atlanta now is this particular stage of gentrification, which is a super hyper phase of gentrification that only maybe New York and San Francisco are really experiencing like on the same kind of level.
You said a bunch of things about class and school, and so I just was curious, is this what you were at least majoring in? Is this something that you thought you'd be doing? Were you planning on staying in Atlanta, or was this kind of out of the blue that this became your passion once you got involved?
Atlanta's always been my passion. And so when I went to Georgia State, I actually started out in film, but I actually didn't make the grades good enough to get into the film program. And so I had an elective, which was African American Studies. And particularly, I just took all that energy and passion that I had as just growing up about Atlanta, and I put it in my studies. And so, and this particular class was a sociology class that I took my senior year that kind of started the whole documentary process. And my initial thought was when I graduated was, okay, you know, when I graduate, I'll go to film school and be a filmmaker. I'll do this little documentary in between a couple months I'm out, you know, and I'll apply to film school and get out there. And then the documentary kind of just took over whatever film school plans I had.
Word.
And so, yeah, and so that's just kind of how it happened.
So how does one begin to take on this kind of project? Where do you get the funding? Who are you working with? Are you just utilizing your network to the best of your abilities? And, you know, how long is this kind of process taking you?
One, I think to start this process, you just have to do it. And the other thing is you probably want to be a little bit naive going into it. Because what I know now versus I would have never started if I knew what I knew now. And to answer,
what?
Yeah, I would have never started because, and to hear me out, this is actually we can speak on more. When I started the film, I didn't know much about him. I actually just knew in my mind what I wanted to see. And the problem was, since I didn't go to film school and I only watched movies and read books and movies and things like that, I never actually made a movie. So how I got funding was I didn't have any. So what I did was I put out a note on Facebook, and this guy I used to play basketball with at Georgia State, this guy named Atlien Clay, he was like, hey, you know, he was from the west side of town, and he was saying that, hey, you know, I think that this would be cool. Let's try to do it. And we didn't have any money. We didn't have anything. So we were at school. So the next thing was, how do we get equipment? How do we make a documentary? How do we contact people? So what I did was we had the newspaper, and I remember all these years of reading the newspaper. I kept every single newspaper article, and I looked at who came up the most and who was the most relevant. And then I emailed these people, and if they were like somebody else who was in the hood or something like that, one of my other homeboys who went to Georgia State with me, a guy named Byron Barkley, who later transferred, he knew a lot of people on the west side as well. And so what we said was, okay, you know what, I'm going to go. I thought Zettler was, like, he's like, I know some people he knew how to get in contact with, and he emailed people that we could never get in contact with, right? So he emailed them. And then Byron was like, oh, I know some people in the hood that, you know, these particular housing projects is left. I can put you on. But the thing was, it was all around school time. So, like, literally, as one person was getting out of class, the other one would be going out to, like, one particular project. And we would just talk to people, hang out with people, get to know them. And how we got our equipment was we had a computer lab at school. And so everyone, it was called the Digital Aquarium. And it was a different kind of, computer lab in the sense that only media people were there. And since I never actually went for media, neither did Byron, neither did Zettler, and some of the other people who came on later, we just started getting cool with the kids who were there, who had their own cameras, who had their own things. And there was one guy in particular, this guy named Dimitri Crowder. He used to go to Georgia State with us, and then he transferred also. And I was like, yo, this guy does great photos. I'm going to just hit him up. And I asked Zettler, my partner, I was like, hey, can you hit up Dimitri and ask him if he wants to be our cinematographer for a documentary? Because he takes these dope photos. And he was like, all right, cool. And so much to my surprise, he was like, yeah, I think it'd be cool. And so then we just literally started following people we saw at school. There was another friend I knew named, a girl named Carrie Randall, and I just hit her up. She was trying to get into PR. She's like, hey, I'll be your PR person. So we literally went to every single person in the school that we knew who did something, and then they all just donated their skills or their equipment to us to make it happen.
Wow.
And this also lapsed or like helped you also move up to New York and work with Spike Lee too.
Right. And so I'm glad you brought that up. So what happened was that, okay, so there's a gap. There's a reason why the Atlanta Way is coming out in 2017 versus like 2011. The reason being is because, like most novice filmmakers and most people who don't know what they're doing, you just run into a brick wall because you literally just don't know what to do next. You don't know how to. We kind of take this for granted now, but you don't know how to. Okay, you made a movie, and this is like the middle days of YouTube. So like, you know, you want to make a movie, but you don't know how to put it on YouTube, right? And then YouTube, at that point, you can only make 15 minutes. So how do you edit something and put it on YouTube for 15 minutes? And then how do you edit a movie to get into a film festival? Like, no one tells you that stuff. So all these things are things we're just trying to find out. And, you know, we're still going to school. A lot of us are graduating out of school and things like that. So it was kind of frustrating. So I was about to stop. And then one of my friends saw that Spike Lee in 2011 had joined Twitter, and then she had dropped out of school the year before to run political campaigns, and she said, you know what, you're going to be Spike Lee's intern. You need to learn something. You've always wanted to be with him. I'm going to get you to be his intern.
Love it.
She's like, in that same computer lab, and then she came up with a campaign that day in that same digital aquarium computer lab, and that evening we started a 8-week campaign via Twitter and email for me to be his intern, and then we just bugged him every single day for weeks on end, and then I got an interview, and with that interview, I didn't talk to Spike. I talked to his assistant, and he talked to me for about 20 minutes, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought maybe he was going to try to arrest me from New York or something, for harassing Spike Lee or something like that, but it just didn't happen. And so then they didn't call me again for like another 6 or 7 weeks, so I didn't hear anything. And then, like, in June, because my birthday's in June, they called me, and it's like, hey, we need you in New York tomorrow. And I was like, I can't get to New York. I mean, I live in Atlanta, and I don't make that kind of money to just fly out there. He said, I don't think you understand. I need you here tomorrow. And I was like, can you give me a week? And so then I just kind of hustled my way up there. My aunt and some of my other family members, my parents, like, helped me get up to New York, and I ended up sleeping on my cousin Keisha's floor. And then for the next 4.5 years, I'm learning and understanding film in New York City. So
amazing.
Oh, so you moved here for a good chunk of time, and then you moved back to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's why the film in particular has like such a large gap in time.
Oh, okay.
So proud of you.
Yeah.
All right. So the Atlanta Way, what is the process now that you are going to be having the film, have a screenings? How are you promoting it? What is the plan to actually like put it in theaters? Are you going to the
festivals,
Black film festivals?
and, yeah.
Are you going to Sundance? Are you doing Cannes? Like, what does that process look like for those of us who aren't as familiar?
I would love to go to Sundance and Cannes and things like that, but one, I don't have enough money for that, and then two, people have been waiting on this film for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm in the process of releasing it myself, and there will be a screening in Atlanta. There'll be a couple screenings throughout the summer. And in regards to that too, we're going to have a 1-week theatrical run, and I'm not going to say who the partner is yet. One will either be a national cinema chain for at least 1 week in Atlanta, or it'll be a local theater chain 1 week in Atlanta. So it will play for a week, and then it'll be video on demand, so iTunes, Amazon, things like that as well.
That's amazing.
Okay, so then you also mentioned your other documentary that you're working on that's coming out in 2018. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and this is actually, and I will say, working on this project has really been a great sin for me, because it's been a great transition from what I'm doing now at the Atlanta Way to kind of seeing what they do on the next level of documentaries. And so this particular project, it's about East Lake Meadows, and it is from the people who did the Central Park 5. If you guys have not seen the Central Park 5, it's an excellent documentary. And so East Lake Meadows, and why particularly this housing project, East Lake Meadows is probably, in terms of like, if you're really big into housing or urban development, if you're an urban planner, you know about East Lake Meadows in Atlanta. The reason being is not just really the crime rate, it's like what the quote-unquote turnaround of what East Lake Meadows is. And so now, if you guys, obviously your audience may not know this, but East Lake Meadows was a housing project, and it was also next to a golf course, which was the East Lake Golf Course. And both those areas have become really run down and really, really just not safe for a lot of people in the late 80s, early 90s. And the whole film, without getting into it, is just talking about what that change was and what that process was. And it's without saying that I think it's going to be an excellent film, because if you guys have not seen the Central Park 5 in film, I think you really should.
It was great. It was hard to watch, but it's a really, really well done documentary.
I gotta watch it. I know it's on the premise of the boys and how they were wrongly accused, and they were super predator like hysteria was going on, and basically like how all of the media targeted these young Black and Latino boys.
Right. And so 5 Black and Latino boys were arrested and convicted of raping
a young white jogger,
in Central Park. And a lot of them did a lot of years in prison and were never... Rikers. Yeah, and like, if you watch the documentary, I mean, you can see how literally, like, they were not guilty at any point, and the cops essentially asked them questions without lawyers present, and, you know, their parents weren't even notified, and they kind of panicked, basically, because they weren't really sure what they were supposed to do. They were offered deals, and then they literally went to jail and hadn't done anything And it shows you the mentality of Black men literally not having a clue about their own rights, or just even having an awareness that they didn't have to be there. You know, they just didn't know anything, and they didn't know any better, and implicated themselves in this horrific crime and paid for it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend watching that documentary as well.
So Eastlake Meadows is funny because I was just in Atlanta this past week, and I'm over here like, I want to buy property on this side of town because it has dramatically changed because of gentrification. And it's this beautiful neighborhood. There's a school over there that's right by the golf course that's over there. Yeah. Now, granted, this golf course also, it's like PGA, like Tiger Woods. I actually worked an event where Tiger Woods, I forgot what PGA tournament it was, but Tiger Woods comes to this particular golf course because it's gorgeous and it's right outside the city of Atlanta. And now the property value of everything in that area has gone up tremendously. Like, I can't even afford to buy a house over there. But I realize they have these like small, cute little neighborhoods, and most of the people who live there do not look like us brown and Black folks. But it's amazing to see how that neighborhood has changed so dramatically, considering what it used to be less than 20 years ago.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Like, part of it's also, too, the way people talk about Chicago was the way that people talked about this particular part of Atlanta, like it was Eastlake Meadows. So to see how it's changed in just 20 years is relatively amazing, but amazing for every particular way. Amazingly good or amazingly bad, it depends on your perspective. And the fact that I've been working with now for quite a few months now with these particular producers, Dave McMahon and Sarah Burns, who is the daughter of Ken Burns, for you folks who don't know, who is a famous documentarian who's done everything from the Civil War to jazz to Jackie Robinson. So just working with them and their team, it's been such an eye-opening experience as to how to do a great story that tells the whole story and like doesn't hold any punches, but also, keeps it honest with the audience. And I think that this particular story, and particularly with Eastlake, it's going to be right on time when it comes out next year. And I can't say that enough. And I'm actually glad to see what this looks like day to day, how that's turning out every single day.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is dope.
So proud of you, man.
Word. And it sounds like you've been, not given anything by any means. You've kind of just been hustling to produce these things. And they sound like they're going to be really groundbreaking and important in the conversations that we're having in general about Black people, but also specific to Atlanta and the culture there. So this is great.
And for working on both of those, the one thing I will say was it helped me finish the film The Atlanta Way a lot quicker now by working on the Eastlake project, is because once you all see the film, and you're welcome to come down to Atlanta for the premiere if you guys want, including your producer. You're not, you're also welcome. But the thing is, you'll see in Atlanta, the Atlanta Way has kind of shifted because over time, as working on the film and then seeing how the film has changed and what's changed in Atlanta, there's a lot of things you just have to leave on the floor. Just because you're not telling a 12-hour documentary on gentrification, you're telling a 90-minute film. So, you have to get from point A to point B to C and get it relatively quickly. And so the great thing about working on these two projects is now that, in particular with both of them, you get a context of why. So the Atlanta Way, you'll get a good overview of what the last days of public housing were in Atlanta and then what contemporary gentrification is. But in terms of working on the Eastlake project, you have a better understanding of how this world of public housing came to be as a whole. And the fact that they're a year apart will be really good for anyone who wants to watch this and they want to kind of see how did we get here and why is it that way. I think both of these films kind of complement each other because they definitely address things that the other one doesn't, in a good way. Because sometimes you watch a movie and it's just too many things are trying to happen in the movie and nothing turns out well. So I'm actually glad that both of these things happen.
Nice.
Awesome. So kind of on a larger scale, we've sort of mentioned these being homegrown kind of films. How do you see just homegrown films in the Black community kind of breaking ground, and how do these things kind of become franchises or sort of global movements?
That's actually an excellent question. And it's a large scale question. How does that become is two ways. You have to have ownership and you have to have buy-in. Ownership, like literally ownership. So we have like 4 people who actually own their content in the industry, one of which is Tyler Perry, one of which is Oprah Winfrey, one of which is Diddy that we don't actually talk about. And another one is a person that probably no one knows, this guy named Byron Allen. And I mentioned those 4 is because how you grow franchises is you can definitely do it through a studio. We see that right now with Kevin Hart with the ride-along films and kind of what his wave is and what Shonda Rhimes is doing on TV. But in terms of like growing these homegrown kind of franchises, you definitely need people who understand your culture, who look like you, who understand the audience, who don't always need a focus group or 7 execs and a bunch of market research that makes your film that was relevant 7 years ago come out in 2019, you know? And I mentioned those 4 people in particular because they all own either TV stations or film companies that can at least move the dial a bit. And you kind of see that with Oprah is kind of doing it in a different way with her TV side. Tyler has done it for sure with TV and with the Medea franchise.
Yeah.
And there's another person, Byron Allen, that no one else really knows about. But in terms of just sheer raw revenue, every year what he's doing in terms of making these little small local TV shows that are only in certain markets and only on basic TV that only like maybe 7 people see, but how he's owning these franchises and really making a real business out of it and taking ad revenue and just changing the game the way that we have never seen before. That's going to be the thing that starts the franchise, at least the first wave. And the next wave will be the people who build on top of that. That's at least my opinion.
Got it. Okay. I guess, what is your kind of goal with your films? Is that something that you'd want to do, build your own franchise, or are you looking to do more collaborative things with other people? Like, how do you plan, I guess, to move forward once you've, moved past the next year or two?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you said that. What I'm doing now is I believe that the future of media is a lot more mobile. And so the thing I started now with the Atlanta Way is, in my particular strategy, is every particular time you do something, you need to be addressing where your audience is. And so I know for the Atlanta Way, most of them are going to be online. Mm-hmm. So it's curtailing where does the Atlanta Way go from here. So once the film is over, one thing we're starting next month, actually, we're doing a podcast series just related on gentrification only. Because we know once the film comes out, there's a lot of things we can't address that's in the film, but, we get a chance to talk to people behind the scenes and people within Atlanta or people within gentrification or people who have general questions and kind of let that live on, and it's a part of the film as well. The next part is, besides working on the Eastlake Project, is building out a great documentary company because I am actively working on another one that I will not say right now, but it will be very different from the two that dramatically different from the two that I'm working on currently. But the idea is, for me, is to do what Pixar does for animated films, to do that for documentaries, because we really don't have that. And so for me, this is the lane that I want to occupy. So for me, every documentary, and the goal is now, after this year, is release a documentary every single year for at least the next 10 years.
Nice.
So that's the idea. And that's in addition to other things that we're trying to do. But right now, every year do a documentary. Every year, keep working with your audience every single year. And over 10 years of time, the idea should be at least there's a company that people know. It takes 10 years to be overnight success. So 10 years from now, it'll be overnight success to a lot of people.
Do you plan on teaching people how to make documentaries or teaching film courses or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, I'm reviving a blog that I did before, which was called Free Film University. And I did that while I was working in New York City. I just meeting so many great people in the film business, and I'm revamping that by the time the film releases later on this summer. So that will also be revamped and renewed. That's just, again, talking to people who work in film. And not just documentaries, but like myself, people who are hairdressers, people who are graphic designers, people who actually are scenics, which are the people who actually paint the movies. Like, people don't think about that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and that was a blog that I did before, and it was solely about getting these particular people to teach their lessons to people like me when I first started out who didn't know anything. So, and that's just a part of the legacy that I want to have. I want people to have knowledge. Like, I will never charge for knowledge, and I feel like, especially within film, you have to have someone who gets you there. One of the reasons I see so many great and talented filmmakers, especially black ones, who just don't make the right steps because they literally don't know what to do. They're spinning their wheels in the wrong places, or they're focusing on, going to just getting into a film festival where sometimes you should be, especially in this day and age, you should probably be building a following. Like Justin Simeon, who did Dear White People that came out a couple of years ago, he built a Twitter following. He wrote a short, did a short, then built a Twitter following. In normal conventions, you would have said, okay, now you need to go for the next 2 years, go try to find a bunch of distributors and then go shoot a film. I mean, he did something different. He spent the next 2 years building his social media, writing his script, still going through the process of becoming a great writer. But instead of rushing to make another film or rushing to get money, he built that audience. So when Dear White People did come out, it kind of had a better leg up. You saw what Issa Rae and what she's been able to transition from YouTube to HBO. But you don't get that unless you kind of know how to get from point A to point B, or at least somebody to point you in the right direction.
Right. And I think that's probably good advice for anybody, whether you're in documentaries or or not?
This was excellent.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you kind of told us what you have coming up. Where can we find you?
Sure. You can find me on every social media platform. It's all the same name, which is I Am King Williams. So I-am King Williams.
Thank you for spelling. Yeah, I understand.
On every social media platform. And then also my project, The Atlanta Way, is that on every single platform as well. So The Atlanta Way or I Am King Williams on every single thing. And you can easily reach me at that. If you do contact me, I do reply. So some people don't, and I just want your audience to know that as well.
Right. Okay. Well, we appreciate your realness and you sharing your journey and how you've kind of navigated through this space.
Yeah. So we can wrap it up here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you can find us on Twitter at Black Meets World, on Instagram at Black_Meets_World, or on Facebook at Black Meets World. And you can also send us an email at blackmeetsworld@gmail.com.
Thanks for joining us, King Williams.
Thank you, King Williams.
Thank you, ladies, for having me.
No problem. We'll talk to you soon.